Hey guys, this is Rob Riv and welcome to Modeling Insanity TV. In this video, I'll be building the new British Matilda 1 from Gecko Models. At the time of this recording, this kit is currently not available, but should be available by the end of March 2026. As you can see in these pictures, the model builds into a great representation of the British Matilda 1, with fantastic interior and exterior detail. The parts are molded excellent with little to no flash or issues, and this kit comes with some of the most Photoetch I've seen in a kit this size. Experience with working with Photoetch is needed to properly construct the parts. In this video, I'll be showing most of the build, including some soldering. Some parts of the build are not shown to save time, but I think they're self-explanatory when watching the construction. I'm going to try and keep the narration to a minimum, and only describe areas of the build at the start and in places I think need explanation, with some music to help this video along. So enough talk, and let's get started. The construction begins with the assembly of the lower hull interior, and the parts are made up of a combination of plastic and Photoetch parts. Here I'm assembling the steering levers and drive controls. Just a small amount of Tamiya extra thin is needed to bond the parts. With the driving levers and controls in place, I attach the floor plate. I applied a little more Tamiya extra thin to the front and rear to ensure a solid bond. You can see the parts in place in these photos, ready for the next steps. Here I am constructing the firewall, adding the fire extinguishers and other details. Next, I assemble the shifters and gearbox. The Photoetch gearbox was made off camera, rounded out and soldered. The shifters are glued with Tamiya extra thin, while the Photoetch gearbox is bonded with a small drop of VMS Flexy CA. The driver's seat is then constructed, making sure to only use a small amount of glue to secure it. With the driver's seat made, it's glued in place along with the other details. You can see in these pictures the level of detail of the gearbox and shifters as well as the driver's seat. Here I'm removing the Photoetch parts using a brand new number 11 X-Acto blade. The parts are cut on a thick acrylic mat used specifically for this. The parts are then secured in a flat nose plier and sanded and buffed smooth using various grits of sanding sticks. I then bend and shape the Photoetch parts using the same flat nose plier. With the parts bent to shape, I start soldering all the Photoetch parts that will be used on the kit. To do all my soldering, I use a 35-watt Weller soldering iron with a power regulator, Alphametals liquid soldering flux, and a .015 6236-2 silver bearing solder. The power regulator will allow you to control the temperature of the solder much better. I secure the Photoetch part to a piece of tape, then add flux to the part using a small disposable brush. The solder is dipped into the flux and applied to the soldering iron. The solder is then transferred to the part, spread out ensuring a solid bond. This soldering process was done for any Photoetch part that needed to be secured together. The parts were then sanded and buffed smooth, again using various grits of sanding sticks. I'm attaching the plastic kit part to the soldered Photoetch using a small amount of VMS Flexy CA. Here the Photoetch has to be soldered closed, and you need to do this carefully as not to affect or melt the plastic part. Again, the solder is first dipped into the flux so it can be attached to the tip of the soldering iron. And a small amount of solder is then applied to the area that needs to be joined. The solder is then transferred to the part and spread out quickly to not affect the plastic. The following parts are all attached using a small amount of VMS Flexy CA. Here you can see all the Photoetch parts soldered and assembled. Again, not all was shown in the video to save time, but the same process of construction was used on all the parts. I now attach the Photoetch and plastic parts to the whole floor. These parts include the ammo racks, batteries, radio, and firewall. I'm now assembling one of the ammo boxes. There are over 15 that needs to be made. A quick point, the cover of the ammo boxes are attached to the sprue in an odd way, so be careful when cutting them off the sprue and when you're cleaning them up. The ammo boxes were then added to the ammo racks. You can see in these pics the progress being made on the hull interior. I'm now attaching the details to the hull sides. A combination of Tamiya Extra Thin and VMS Flexy CA is used to attach the Photoetch and plastic parts to the hull sides. You can definitely see how well detailed these Photoetch and kit parts are in these photos. Now it's time to assemble the hull. I first attached the rear plate using some Tamiya Extra Thin cement. I first test fit both sides of the hull to ensure there are no obstructions from the interior detail. Once happy with the fit, I then attach the left side of the hull by first applying some Tamiya Extra Thin cement to the back side of the hull from the inside. I then hold the parts in place until a strong bond is created. I then carefully apply more Extra Thin to the outside of the front of the left side hull, and then hold it in place again until a strong bond is created. Here you can see the left side of the hull in place. I then follow the same steps for the right side of the hull. First gluing the back side of the hull from the inside and then holding it in place until a strong bond is created, while also using the firewall as a glue point. I then carefully glued the front part of the hull from the outside, again holding it in place. You can see in these pics how well the fit is for both hull side plates. The fit was a little off when attaching the top hull parts. To correct this, I had to reduce the height of the inside tabs, as you can see here. I trimmed them down a bit with my number 11 X-Acto blade. By reducing the height, it then allowed the top plates to fit perfectly. I'm assuming that this is a design flaw and most likely will be needed to be done in all the kits. Because of the adjustment to the tabs under the front top hull plate, the tabs for the front vision port and top hull plate needed to be modified slightly, as the tabs were showing when test fitting. To correct this, the tabs were removed from the vision port plate and the connection holes were filled on the front top plate using some plastic and Tamiya extra thin cement. They were both cleaned up and sanded smooth, and the fit was perfect. The front of the hull was then built, attaching all the details. After it was glued to the front of the hull, the Photoetch gas and foot pedals were secured in place with some VMS Flexy CA. Here you can see the completed interior. Gecko Models did an outstanding job with this. Again, experience with working with Photoetch will make building this much easier and enjoyable. I first attached the rear part to the upper hull plate and then test fitted to see if it correctly sat after reducing the height of the interior tabs. Once happy with the fit, the top plates were glued in place, as well as both the backside driver's top hatch and back hatch plate. You can see how well these reworked parts fit in these photos. The reworked front vision port hatch and front driver's hatch were then added using just a little Tamiya extra thin cement. Now I need to say this, the instructions have you add the rear turret hatch doors before gluing the top plates on. They're in the background of this part of the video. I didn't glue them on when it was shown in the instructions and I regretted it. Because once the other parts were glued onto the hull, I had a tough time getting the hatches to glue and attach. This is why I did not film myself adding them to the rear deck. I had to be right over the model to correctly put them on. I was able to do it, but it was very difficult. So again, follow the instructions. Here I'm attaching the Photoetch grills to the infamous rear hatches using some VMS Flexy CA. Once the grills were on, I attached the outside hatch doors. You can see the engine grills in place in these photos, along with the rear hatches under the large grills that I should have followed the instructions on. The front axles are also attached in these photos, and this was done off camera because some reworking needed to be done to get them to fit correctly. A combination of Photoetch and plastic kit parts are now being added to the hull sides. Parts like the Photoetch tool holders were made off camera and attached using some VMS Flexy CA. You can see the parts and brackets in these photos. Here I'm showing where you need to attach the front stowage bins, which were made off camera. There are two notches on the back of the stowage bins that correspond to raised areas on the Photoetch brackets. Because I needed to be over the model when attaching them, I had to do this off camera, but the boxes were attached with a few drops of VMS Flexy CA and held in place until a strong bond was created. Other side hole details were also added at this time. Here you can see the stowage boxes as well as all the tools and details in these photos. I now start to build the suspension, which I will say is very delicate and fiddly, so be very careful when assembling. The instructions have you first build 8 sections of road wheels with 2 sections making up 4 separate suspension arms. Here you can see the completed suspension arms. The dry sprockets are molded well and are easy to assemble. After assembly, I used a run of link and length tracks to ensure the sprocket teats were aligned. Here I start to assemble the individual track links. Ten links of tracks are needed for both the sprockets and the idler wheels. And left to dry a bit before wrapping them around the dry sprockets and idler wheels and left to fully cure. You can see the sprocket, idler wheel, and tracks in these photos. The suspension arms are then attached to the hull in their corresponding places. You can see each of the suspension arms in place in these photos. They are as delicate as they look. With the suspension fully cured, it was time to attach the link and length tracks. I will say that these tracks were very easy to assemble, much in the same way as Tamiya's link and length tracks. The bottom run of tracks would consist of one long track run, two smaller track runs, and 4 runs of already assembled individual link tracks were glued together with Tamiya extra thin cement and left to cure for a bit. While the lower tracks were curing, the sag top run of tracks was attached to the tracks on the drive sprocket. The top run of tracks were then attached to the tracks around the idler wheel. With the top run of tracks in place, the bottom run of tracks are added to the suspension. These tracks are put in place at the bottom of the drive sprocket and idler wheel tracks. Again, the tracks went on very easy. Just follow the instructions and do some planning in advance and you'll have no problem. With the tracks in place, I can now attach the back mud guards. Here you can see all the lower hull details and tracks in place. In these photos, you can also see some details that were not filmed, namely the side lights and brackets, rear exhaust, and the detail on the rear plate of the kit. These needed a little more care when adding to the kit and were hard to film, but you can see all the detail in these photos. With the hull details and tracks assembled, it was time to construct the turret. Like the hull, the turret also had very nice interior detail and assembly is pretty straightforward. The gun breech is comprised of only a few parts and very easy to assemble. After attaching the lower parts of the turret, there's a prominent seam line that runs across the mantlet and rear part of the turret. To fix this, I first sanded the parts flush, then added stretch sprue made from the kit. The stretch sprue was glued into the seams and left to fully cure. Once cured, the sprue was sanded and blended into the hull with various grit sanding sticks. To recreate the cast texture that was lost in the sanding process, Tamiya extra thin cement was applied straight from the bottle and stippled on the turret to create a rough and uneven texture. Once dried, it was lightly sanded and blended into the rest of the cast turret. Here I'm using an X-Acto blade and various grit sanding sticks to knock down the high points that were created during the stippling of the Tamiya Extra Thin. The turret hatches, smoke discharges, and other details were then added to the turret. You can see in these photos how easy it is to recreate cast texture, especially with Tamiya extra thin cement. We then put the turret on the model and we can call this build done. And on that note, I'm going to end this video with a little turntable of the finished build. This kit was a joy to build, but that doesn't mean that there were no issues building it, whether it be because of kit design or because of not following the instructions like I did. You also need some experience working with Photoetch to really get the most out of this kit. Gecko Models did a great job with this kit and I highly recommend it. It should be available worldwide at the end of March 2026. All the details will be in the description below on all the products and tools used during the building of this kit. Like, share, and subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new video. Also, you can listen to me as well as my fellow co-hosts on the Modeling Insanity podcast, which you can find on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, and other podcast hosting companies, as well as the Quarter Scale Madness podcast, which focuses on everything 1/48 scale and quarter scale models, as well as our new podcast, Model Car Mania, for all you car model enthusiasts out there. You can read the full build of this Gecko Models Matilda 1 in the April 2026 issue of Military Modelcraft International. You can always message me at any time on my Facebook modeling page at Rob Riz Modeling Insanity. I also want to thank Ruben at Gecko Models for sending me this kit to build and review. I hope you enjoyed the full build review and I appreciate everybody watching, and keep an eye out for more build videos and how-to tutorials coming to the channel very soon.